Good morning once again. I'm Dr. Rahnuma, and I come from Bangladesh. It's one of the eight largest, densely populated nations in the world. It's very small, and we have about 175 million population, and we have about 60% of population who actually belong to the youth. So we actually our official language is Bengali, but we try to actually embed English into our curriculum because from very early period, students actually learn English as a mandatory subject. And of course, they learn grammar. So grammar is taught in the GTM method, translation method, in the old school way. And students actually pick up rules and they do rote learning. They memorize learning. So I had an English department, English and Modern Languages department at my university. And all the students who actually join the university, they must actually do 9 credits of mandatory English courses. So what we actually end up having, the ground reality is we have large classroom sizes. We have 30 to 45 students in a language classroom. And if you are meant to teach them writing and speaking, the productive skills, think about the burden, the emotional burden on the teachers. And that's what I'm going to look into today, because my study actually explores the effective dimensions of English medium instruction in Bangladesh. In other words, we want to see how teachers actually experience, negotiate, and sustain emotional labor in their professional life. So the first objective is to actually study how EMI teachers experience and manage their emotional labor. In terms of, in response to institutional expectation and classroom dynamic. Like I said, you have a large classroom size of 35 to 40 students. And of course, teachers actually teach 4 courses. So the teaching load, besides administrative load, is very high. So what we want, this study actually tries to also look into how the EMI lecturers maintain composure when they deal with diverse student backgrounds who come from different bilingual and hierarchical contexts, shaped by colonial legacies. Bangladesh belonged to it was, of course, it's not part of India anymore. It was one country years back before the partition happened in 1947. But the colonial legacies, it has made it a point that English is per se the official language, even though it's not actually, it doesn't have the status of an official language, because Bengali is still the only official language. So this study actually seeks to analyze teachers' coping strategies to actually see how they regulate their emotions, through peer support, even sometimes strategic detachment, and their impact on their identity, most importantly, their well-being and pedagogy, contributing to a global South perspective to AMI research amidst dominant Western-centric narratives. So we come from that viewpoint. So building on the study's objectives, these research questions guide our exploration of how emotional labor operates within the EMI context of Bangladesh. So the key research question looks into how EMI teachers experience and manage their emotional labor, but it also focuses on their lived experiences as they balance institutional demands, like I said, heavy workload with administrative responsibilities and the classroom realities. The second question actually examines what emotions dominate their practice, capturing both positive, such as pride, joy, empathy, or even challenging ones like frustration, fatigue, or tension in multilingual high-stakes settings. So the third question actually shifts to the institutional level to actually see how the organizational norms, policies, and hierarchies shape what these emotions teachers actually express or maybe suppress. Because we say it's an English medium institution, and we have over 100 private universities where the medium instruction is essentially English. There are public universities, about 50 of them, but they run a mixed mode of the media MOI. But all the private universities, they actually conduct their teaching and learning assessment in English. So finally, the final question investigates how teachers actually cope and sustain themselves emotionally through self-regulation, collegial support, sometimes humor, and professional distance. and what these actual strategies reveal about their true identity and well-being. So these questions together, they frame actually how an individual burden, but rather also as a social process as to how this whole mediated thing is embedded into the linguistic fabric of Bangladesh. So how do we define emotion labor? The term emotional labor was originally developed by sociologist Arlie Hochschild in 1983 to describe how employees manage their emotions to align with professional expectations. These tacit affective expectations, known as feeling rules, shape how one should feel and which emotion one should actually perform and exhibit, like flight attendants who must always smile. So in language education, scholars like Jim Balais and especially Sarah Bench have shown that teachers' emotions are not just personal, they're shaped by social, political, and institutional forces. So Bench actually reframed Hochschild's idea by using the term emotion labor to move away from the gendered connotations and to highlight how teachers actually, teachers' emotions are influenced not only by workplace demands, but also by the broader sociocultural discourses and policies that influence form of conduct in institutions. So EMI instruction or EMI, English medium instruction or EMI has been a defining feature of higher education across Asia, like, of course, Europe and other African nations. In Bangladesh, universities, as I said, the private ones have adopted EMI as part of their drive towards internationalization, ranking, and global visibility. But while EMI policies emphasize language proficiency and academic excellence, they often overlook something very crucial: the emotional experience of the teachers who make EMI possible in class. So EMI expansion reshaped teachers' role, expectations, their emotional engagements. And of course, teachers must not only teach their subjects, but they also need to perform confidence, manage student anxiety, and support students struggling with English, when they're trying to learn their subject in English. So emotional labor in AMI setting involves balancing institutional demands, linguistic hierarchy. Like I said, we have colonial legacies in place, and of course, sociocultural norms in relation to respect, authority, and sometimes gender roles. So however, existing research on EMI mainly focus on linguistic competence and pedagogy, with teachers' emotion remaining unexplored in Bangladeshi context. So my data sources actually for this very small scale qualitative study included classroom observations, followed by semi-structured interviews, which were kind of like the reflections of the teachers from a private university. So the teachers actually taught subjects like business math, social sciences, and humanities. So I actually conducted a thematic coding to actually look for recurring patterns, which describe how teachers felt and how they actually displayed their emotion, allowing for a more deep and nuanced understanding rather than a generalization. So these three major themes emerge from the data. Let me briefly walk you through each one of these. So most of the teachers actually described a subtle but persistent anxiety about their English. Now, even though they were highly competent, most of them they had an international degree, they still feared being judged by students, peers, or administrators. They often sometimes were taken aback when they would be asked a question about some grammatical rule. Maybe if you actually return written feedback to students will come and actually ask you, what did I do wrong? So teachers actually refrain from explaining grammatical terms. Rather, they would actually give the rightly constructed sentence rather than explaining what's actually wrong with the sentence. So teachers, to suppress the emotional labor, said, I smile even when I forget a word. And I don't let them see that I'm nervous, because it's a large classroom size. You have 35 to 40 students and large class, and where you don't have the right to actually become nervous. So that smile, that calm performance, that's what I call emotion labor. And teachers regulate these emotions to sustain credibility and to protect their professional identity. And these aligns with, what we call as performance of linguistic confidence. As ESL teachers, we must actually look confident in the way we perform or exhibit our emotions. So this is how emotion and language intertwine in classroom identity work. The second emotional challenge was actually balancing care with control. Teachers felt torn between wanting to be empathetic towards students' language struggle, to actually teach the whole class in Bengali, and also trans-language in English, so that they're constantly switching between codes, but also to maintain authority in class. A participant said, sometimes I know they don't understand because they're all giving me blank looks. But when I want to resort to excessive translation, I fear that they will stop trying to learn or stop trying to understand. So this emotional balancing act between empathy and disciplinary rigor reflects what I call as pedagogical care. It's not simply emotional regulation, but rather a moral and relational choice, how to teach responsibly without alienating the learners. So the third and the final theme deals with institutional pressure. As I said, the institutions actually have the policy that all the classes must be taught in English. So teachers often felt that these EMI policies were introduced without adequate training or emotional support. They were expected to embody international quality, fluency, and confidence while navigating local classroom realities. These mismatch between policy ideals and classroom realities actually created tension. And teachers internalize this expectation, sometimes blaming themselves for not doing enough or not being good enough. They also find creative ways to actually cope. They shared frustration with colleagues after every class. They used humor, and they, of course, strategically used trans-languaging. So these micro acts of adaptation and resistance show emotional labor as both a burden and a resource. So indeed, emotional labor in EMI is not just about individual coping, it's about structural conditions. The emotional demands arise from these linguistic hierarchies and neoliberal discourses that equate English with success and global mobility. Secondly, educators are not actually bystanders to their circumstances. Through very small but meaningful acts like humor, empathy, or reflective talk, they reclaim emotional agency. And in Benish's term, they actually turn emotional labor into a form of resistance against unrealistic expectations. So these insights from this research have practical implications for, of course, institutional support, with AMI programs fostering greater professional development that goes beyond language training by addressing emotional awareness as well as reflective teaching. Also, most importantly, fostering communities of practice where teachers can actually openly share the emotional experiences, talk about peer collaboration, all this which actually help elevate feelings of isolation and strengthen, which actually further strengthens professional bonds. AMI policies also must acknowledge the emotional toll of Englishization that offer structural support, not merely impose performance expectations. And situating these teachers' emotions within ecological layers of an institution inside classroom, as well as sociocultural context, provide a holistic understanding of the emotional realities of EMI in Bangladesh, and actually helps institutions support teachers' well-being to improve professional development and create empathetic EMI policies. To conclude, the emotional labor of EMI teachers lie at the heart of how education works in multilingual societies. It's about holding multiple identities as disciplinary experts, language users, as well as emotional caregivers. Recognize and valuing this invisible labor is vital if you want EMI to be not just linguistically successful, but emotionally sustainable. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to give it.